My testimony had no violence and no aggression and no anything. It was really like a surprise to me, to the fact that I was even called to testify.
Everything seemed shiny and glamorous in Diddy's world, but Sharay Hayes just stepped into the courtroom to reveal dark secrets that shake that illusion. Her bombshell testimony about wild, orchestrated sex events involving Cassie leaves you questioning. How far does this truth go? And wait until you hear Don Richards' chilling account of violent behaviors. This is a side of Diddy no one ever imagined, what really happened behind closed doors.
As the Punisher, 51-year-old told us that based on his experience, he didn't know what alleged crime he was testifying about.
Sharay Hayes was a prosecution witness, though some believe he helped the defense. Our Anthony DiLorenzo joining us now. Anthony, you were inside the courtroom, and then right after you spoke to Mr. Hayes, who is relieved, he says, right, that all of this is over.
He certainly is. He told me that he never looked at Diddy, even in the eye, but was not intimidated at all by his presence on the stand, saying he was there just to tell the truth. But as someone who makes his living as a male dancer, wants people to know that he would never do anything to hurt a woman.
Sure, Hayes' name might not have been familiar to most people before this case, but now she's at the center of a shocking courtroom moment. As an exotic dancer who frequently moved within Diddy's inner circle, her testimony has exposed a side of the music mogul's life that few ever imagined. Hayes described herself as someone who was pulled into wild, extravagant events where privacy was a luxury few were granted. Her involvement in this case came after allegations about these events gained momentum, and her first-hand account is now one of the most damning pieces of evidence presented. Her testimony stunned everyone in the room. According to Hayes, Diddy not only hosted these elaborate gatherings but was deeply involved in their orchestration. These weren't just parties in the typical sense. Hayes described them as carefully planned events where attendees followed an unspoken set of rules. She claimed Cassie was a central figure in these gatherings, but not by choice. Cassie, according to Hayes, often appeared uncomfortable and withdrawn, yet she would be pressured into performing for Diddy's entertainment or for that of his guests. Hayes alleged that Diddy maintained strict control over who participated, and he had no qualms about setting specific expectations for their behavior. What Hayes shared about these events painted a disturbing picture. She detailed a scene where the atmosphere was both seductive and stifling. Music blared, expensive alcohol flowed freely, and the lighting was dim, creating an environment where it was easy to lose track of time and inhibitions. But Hayes described this glamour as a facade. Behind the scenes, power dynamics loomed large. Men of influence mingled with young women who, according to Hayes, seemed more like pawns than willing participants. She claimed Diddy's presence was magnetic yet terrifying, as he allegedly dictated the energy of the room and made it clear who held real authority. What gave Hayes' testimony even more weight were the details she provided that appeared to line up with separate accounts. Courtroom murmurs grew louder when Hayes mentioned specific locations, mansions, luxury penthouses, and private yachts, where these events allegedly occurred. Cross-referencing her timeline with other witnesses, prosecutors hinted that these descriptions aligned with previous reports from insiders. This consistency, coupled with Hayes' vivid storytelling, sent shockwaves through the courtroom. But perhaps the most chilling moment of Hayes' testimony came when she described specific interactions between Diddy and Cassie. She claimed Cassie's attempts to refuse participation were often dismissed, with Diddy exerting subtle but undeniable pressure. Hayes said it was less about asking and more about making sure compliance wasn't optional. This testimony wasn't even the end of the revelations. As jaw-dropping as Sharay Hayes' account was, it became clear that there were more unsettling truths on the horizon. Dawn Richard, who worked closely with Diddy as part of Diddy Kane, had her own bombshell to drop, and her focus wasn't on lavish gatherings, but on alleged violence that hit much closer to home.
I was hoping that I'm not viewed as somebody who did something to Cassie or contributed to her experience in a negative way.
Also on the stand Tuesday, Ventura's mother, Regina, who showed photos she took of her daughter's alleged physical abuse, and an email from Cassie fearing that Combs would release a sex tape or hurt her if she didn't pay him $20,000, a sum he later returned. Combs' former personal assistant, David James, also testified how he once accompanied Diddy to confront Suge Knight in California, armed with guns, admitting he later quit because he thought his life was in danger. So back to Mr. Hayes, the Punisher, says he stopped getting calls for freak-offs after failing to satisfy the demands of the job he was paid thousands for, something that he's actually written about in his men's health book without naming names. So it was jam-packed today at court.
Yeah, Anthony, it was really like a wide-ranging and fascinating interview. I'm curious, after he spoke with him, did he weigh in on Diddy's guilt or innocence?
So at this point, he says that he really has not read much about what this case is about, hasn't read up on any of the testimony so far, the facts of this case. He doesn't even have a full picture.
Cassie's introduction to Diddy's world seemed like the stuff dreams are made of. She was a young star with undeniable talent, brought under the wing of one of the most powerful figures in music. Their public relationship, a mix of professional collaboration and personal connection, gave the impression of a fairy tale mentorship. But according to testimony, what happened behind the scenes was anything but glamorous. Sharay Hayes painted a much darker picture of what Cassie allegedly endured, describing her as someone trapped in an environment controlled and manipulated by Diddy's influence. Hayes testified that Cassie was central to many of these orchestrated encounters. Her involvement was not presented as voluntary, but rather the result of what Hayes described as coercion and psychological pressure. According to Hayes, Diddy made it clear that everyone had a role to play, and Cassie's role wasn't up for debate. These were not spontaneous parties or organic moments. They allegedly followed a script, one written by Diddy. Hayes claimed Cassie often appeared uncomfortable, her body language tense, as though she was complying out of fear rather than freedom. The court heard specific examples of how these events were allegedly set up. Hayes described private locations where attendees were vetted and an anything-goes atmosphere prevailed. Yet that freedom didn't extend to everyone. For Cassie, Hayes claimed her participation was mandatory and her discomfort was ignored. Hayes recounted a moment where Cassie reportedly tried to avoid involvement, only for Diddy to step in and insist she stop acting out. The implication, Hayes suggested, was that Diddy's power over Cassie left her with little choice but to comply. What's especially disturbing is how this alleged dynamic mirrors patterns seen in other high-profile cases in Hollywood. Experts have long discussed the way power imbalances between stars and their partners, or even their mentors, create environments ripe for exploitation. In Cassie's case, the layers of Diddy's control, from her music career to their personal relationship, compounded the pressure. Hayes' testimony suggests this wasn't just about manipulation in a professional sense. It was deeply personal, a tangled web Cassie couldn't escape. Prosecutors hinted that more witnesses might come forward with details supporting Hayes' narrative. If true, this could paint an even clearer picture of Diddy's alleged grip on Cassie. For now, her role in these events stands as a shocking testament to the power imbalance that Hayes and others have described. The courtroom was left grappling with bigger questions about consent, autonomy, and how much control someone with Diddy's influence could exert. But Hayes wasn't the only one with explosive claims. Don Richards' emotional testimony would soon pull the focus from manipulation to outright violence, leaving even more to be uncovered about Diddy's alleged inner world.
We had no violence and no aggression and no anything. It was really like a surprise to me, to the fact that I was even called to testify.
Hours after leaving the witness stand, an escort named the Punisher spoke to Pix 11 about his surreal experience on the stand in the Sean Combs trial. Was it intimidating sitting in front of him telling the story?
It was not, because the story is honestly what happened.
His real name? Sharay Hayes. The 51-year-old has been working in the adult entertainment industry for 30 years and recalls taking a phone call from Cassie Ventura in 2012. Cassie is the one who always handed you the money?
Yes.
And she's the one who always set this up, except for that one weird text that you got?
Exactly.
This was his first foray as an escort, but says he would never participate in the so-called freak-offs had he thought Cassie was being coerced.
I literally Can't say that any part of my experience gave me any cues that this was a woman in distress. More of a fetish type of scenario.
He says Diddy was directing the two, but never aggressively. Now that he knows about the sex trafficking allegations, regrets his participation.
Dawn Richard, best known as a member of the girl group Donity Kane, had her fair share of success under Diddy's mentorship. She came onto the scene during the peak of Diddy's influence in the early 2000s, when he was orchestrating reality TV-fueled music acts and expanding his empire. But her testimony revealed she witnessed far more than the ups and downs of a music career. Her experiences painted a picture of violence that stunned the courtroom and added another layer to the already disturbing allegations against him. While most witnesses in the case were focused on exposing Diddy's alleged coercion and control, Dawn's testimony drew attention to what she described as regular outbursts of anger and aggression. She claimed Diddy didn't just manipulate. He used physical intimidation to instill fear in those around him. One particular incident Dawn recounted involved a moment during a recording session where Diddy allegedly lashed out over a disagreement. It didn't matter who was there when he got angry. You felt it, she said, adding that the emotional aftermath of these episodes lingered long after they happened. But the most chilling story Dawn described wasn't about a studio meltdown or a professional dispute. It was personal. According to her, she once saw Diddy grab Cassie's arm during an argument, pulling her so forcefully that she winced in pain. Dawn's voice reportedly trembled as she explained how the room froze in silence, no one daring to intervene. This isn't the first time allegations of volatile behavior have been linked to Diddy. But hearing an insider like Dawn testify so vividly struck a nerve in the courtroom. What stands out in Dawn's account is
Punisher, and that he was a male exotic dancer, and I was like, oh, that kind of clicked. So he had walked in. He's a very tall man. He's well put together. He had an entire suit on with a tie. He's very built, and the first thing that the prosecution asked was just about the exhibit photos, those exhibit photos being just kind of a standard press photo, essentially, of Diddy and Cassie, and he confirmed that that's Cassie Ventura and that's Sean Combs, aka Diddy. And so he said in the fall of 2012, he was paid to create a sexy, erotic scene for a woman who had called him. He said that he met the two while he was working at a club event, but it was a woman who had called him saying that she wanted kind of a present by her husband around her birthday time, and that her husband said it was okay if she were to hire a dancer. So the Punisher initially thought that he was going to be doing kind of a dance for women at a bachelorette party, but when somebody opened the door, it was, lo and behold, Cassie Ventura. He had said that she was wearing a bathrobe and she was a wig, and initially didn't even recognize her at first. But this was this first meetup that they had, again, expecting a crowd during this, but really it was just Cassie in the room. Again, not knowing it was Cassie at the time. And then he was told that her husband wanted her to put baby oil on each other and create this kind of fantasy, this erotic scene.